Is the more than 70-year alliance between the United States and South Korea over? Has NATO responded adequately to the constant incursions in the air incursions by Russia? And has Ukraine's strategy of targeting wild berries as well as the Russian military and energy infrastructure, is that a good strategy to win the war in Ukraine's favor? We're going to be discussing that and some related issues with my special guest in just a few minutes. But I'm David Dubato, and this is the No Delusion Zone for Monday, August 17th, 2026. And my guest is my friend and frequent guest on the No Delusion Zone, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. Welcome back, Ben.
Dave, thanks for letting me come back.
No problem. Like I said, we've got some stuff to discuss and in a limited amount of time. So let's jump right into it. One of the more distressing stories, as far as I'm concerned, was the announcement by Trump, where he says Trump orders the Pentagon to curtail military exercises with ally South Korea. In a social media post, the president scolded South Korea for not helping denuclearize Iran and praised North Korea and its leader. And I want to play this brief clip, and then we'll get right into that.
This is raising a lot of concern, I would say, because South Korea and the US are very close military partners, and there's a lot of questions about what Trump means by this. I would say that South Korea is quite surprised. The announcement by Trump was made just hours before the exercise was supposed to start, so preparations were all underway. South Korea and the US have had a very long relationship as allies. South Korea has routinely helped the US with assistance in various conflicts, and there are about 28,500 US troops stationed in Korea. However, under Trump, the relationship has seemed to become a lot more transactional. This is not the first time actually that Trump has said that he wants to reduce these joint military exercises. He has talked also about troop reduction in South Korea. He has asked South Korea to invest more in the US in exchange for reducing tariffs. So the Iran war is, I guess, one of the newer issues. Trump said in his post that South Korea had declined to join his denuclearization of Iran, which a lot of analysts are saying seems to be the main trigger point for this move.
Your thoughts, Ben?
Well, I was a major in South Korea back in the 90s, like many in the U.S. military, served there for a year. And I can remember the team spirit and ultra-focus lens exercises every year and the work that we did with our ROK counterparts. But I can also remember that one exercise was canceled. This was in the 90s, and it had to do with the political environment. So, the fact that an exercise itself is being canceled or curtailed is not news. What's news and what concerns me, and I think people like you as well who understand the issues, is what interest is this tied to? I mean, for me, everything about strategy starts with what are our interests? What do we try to protect? And of course, you always have to prioritize. You can't possibly protect every interest. What are our interests? And now, this does not seem to be aligned with all the statements by Undersecretary of Policy Bridge Colby, who has talked about, this is the theater, that China is the threat. And now here we are, and of course you put this in the context of not only South Korea, but also Taiwan. The president has stopped any arms shipment to Taiwan. The only aircraft carrier in theater was just moved from the Pacific towards the Middle East to replace the Abraham Lincoln. So it looks to me that the interests are not clearly defined, or that they have dropped down to a very low priority. And the last thing I would say is, the journalist there, Ms. Go, that you just showed, she put her finger on it. This is all about transaction. And the president saying, since South Korea doesn't want to help us with Iran, screw you. That's not connected to strategic interests, it seems to me.
Well, the most distressing thing about that particular story is, and like you said, the exercises have been canceled before, and not just with South Korea, with other allies, and that's not a big issue. What the bigger issue is for me is the fact that he is constantly schmoozing and pumping up Kim Jung Un as a good guy, as a great guy, as a great leader, somebody that he respects, which goes in the face of decades of American and Western foreign policy to try to isolate this madman. And so that bothers me a lot. But he's doing the same thing, of course, with Putin and with Xi in China. And I just want to say this. I used to believe somewhat that Trump was under was some kind of a paid informant, agent, apparatchik, whatever, of the Kremlin. But I don't believe that anymore. I just believe that he likes to schmooze and to cozy up to dictators because he sees himself as a strong man, and he really appreciates and idolizes other dictators and strongmen who live up to what he feels is the epitome of a good leader. So I think that's what's going on here with North Korea. There's no ideology there because Trump doesn't have any ideology. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, this is the guy we're dealing with here, and I'm sorry. This is just a fact. Crude as it is, this is who we're dealing with. And this is, Ben, this is our Secretary of Defense. I mean, when you put these two guys together, I'm sorry, you're too polite and professional to get into all of that, but I'm just disgusted. And I don't want to go on and on about what's going on in South Korea. I happen to feel this is a huge issue or chapter in the deterioration of our alliance there. And of course, he doesn't mention the fact that North Korea is now supplying 50,000 troops to Ukraine. But why should he care? Because he's been abandoning Ukraine.
Well, that's an important point.
Yes.
The fact that, he sees Kim Jung Un as friendly and respectful and all of that, yet Kim Jong Un is helping to kill Europeans. He's helping to violate all the international laws and norms. Now, the president, of course, and his administration have not been champions of international norms or international laws. So, while it's hard to imagine this sort of thing happening in any previous administration, Republican or Democrat, this seems it kind of fits. So what we need to find out is from the Congress. What is the Republican Congress led Congress, including the MAGA support, are they okay with this? I wonder if Lindsey Graham, were he still alive, would he have commented on this? I have no great expectations that the many spineless members of the Congress on the Republican side will actually challenge the president on this, but they should be asking themselves, okay, what is our strategic interest? Or are we, in fact, turning our back? Is this part of turning our back? Now, I have, like you, have been reading all day about, people commenting on this and trying to think through the implications. And, some people have already said, look, South Korea, they've not been paying their share. They've turned towards China. I mean, this is already a MAGA talking point that the South Koreans have turned towards China anyway. They're not very helpful, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's starting to look like the way the administration deals with so many other nations in the region. Are we on an irreversible slide downhill in terms of American influence in the region? I mean, when countries, none of them are perfect, but when they lose confidence in the United States, when they no longer fear the United States, they don't respect the United States. The way tariffs have worked and trade, I mean, none of this is consistent, normal. I think we are going to regret, just like we will in Europe, when countries realize, okay, the U.S. is no longer going to be the hegemon here. They're putting their interests elsewhere. I think we are going to regret it because the kind of things that are happening are not things that can be fixed on, January the 20 whatever, 2029. at the beginning of the next presidential term, whoever that is. These are not things that will be turned around.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Lindsey Graham thing, because in my opinion, and I said it even then, just after he passed, that this was a momentary blip in terms of Congress, meaning the being united and supporting Ukraine, supporting a strong American foreign policy and defense structure and all of that. It was a tribute to him, which I applaud, but it's going to pass. I don't believe that there's any way that they're going to change course, that they're certainly not going to go against Trump. So whatever he wants to do, they will just rubber stamp it. And that's an issue. And just maybe lastly on this point, it's ironic, though, all these MAGA senators, Republican senators that are so anti-China. And you made this point, basically, they're driving our allies towards China. They are driving them to our supposed worst enemy, because they can no longer depend on the United States. And if they're in Southeast Asia, especially, or anywhere in Asia, where are they going to go? If they're a smaller country, they have to continue to have trade. They have to continue to survive, and they have to continue to defend their national security. If we leave a vacuum, where are they going to go? To the Philippines? They're also under a security problem with China. So, no, I agree. This is a long-term problem that apparently this administration doesn't care about, the Congress anyway. And it's just horrible. And you mentioned China. I don't want to get into too much with that. This is just making China great again, which is just ironic to me and very, very sad. I would like to shift to something that I think you are more comfortable or familiar with. Maybe I'm wrong, which is, the Russian-Ukraine issue. I'm really happy to, every time I wake up, to read about where Ukraine has struck now in Russia. I think it's just unbelievable. So I want to talk about that in the most of the remaining time that we have left. What do you think about the Ukrainian strategy of targeting wild berries, and as well as, of course, the Russian energy infrastructure and their military logistics, command and control centers, manufacturing centers, and so forth? Do you think this is a good long-term strategy, other than, say, just pounding the Russian forces in the Donbass or on the Ukrainian eastern border? Is this something that you believe long-term is going to result in a Ukrainian victory? And I'll get into some more specifics about that in just a bit.
I think it's brilliant. I think the decision by the Ukrainians to prioritize going after Russia's oil and gas infrastructure at the strategic level, that undermines Russia's ability, or degrades Russia's ability, to pay for the war if they cannot export oil and gas. And they're already having to import gas and diesel from India for their own domestic market, if you can imagine the irony there. So this is a line of effort that needs to continue. That is very effective strategic bombing that is targeting the one thing that really keeps Russia in the war. At the operational level, the attack on the logistics infrastructure, not only the convoys and rail networks that bring ammunition and fuel and supplies and people in and out of Crimea and in the Zaporizhzhia region and all the rest of the occupied parts of Ukraine, but also the wild berries destroying these warehouses and the shipping hub, which is widely known that the Russian military was using that as a way to move critical things, maybe not big piles of ammunition, but everything else that the army needs. So that's a legitimate attack on the logistics hub. So that in a way is also, and I saw this just the other day, a consideration if you would like to forestall Russia having another mobilization, which I think they absolutely do not want to do, but they are thinking about it. Killing Russian troops was never going to be the path to victory for Ukraine, because the Russians don't care about these unlucky individuals. So, in other words, destroying at the strategic level and the operational level Russian logistics, Russia's ability to pay for the war, versus continuing to kill lots of Russian troops that would have to be replaced is actually, I think, seems to me to be a wise strategy. Obviously, you have to kill Russians that are attacking, and they've done this very effectively. The Ukrainians have, stopping them with this famous kill zone, which is a combination of drones and artillery, etc. But I think this really reflects a shrewd understanding of the nature of the character of this war.
I agree with you. I mean, I think it's a brilliant strategy also, and it's one that I think caught most, if not all, Western analysts and pundits flat-footed, as everything has caught them flat-footed since the full-scale invasion began. I have been very impressed, and I'll admit a little surprised at the speed at which Ukraine has developed not only their drone warfare, which is just unprecedented, and their anti-drone warfare, but also their ballistic missile capability. The Flamingo, which is now, I think, undergoing its second and shortly its third iteration. It's going to be used as an offensive and a defensive weapon against Russian ballistic missiles. Do you believe, Ben, that Ukraine, with the current shortage of Patriot missiles and the constant hammering that they do undergo every single day and night, is going to be able to survive the upcoming winter long enough until they develop their long-range ballistic missile capability and receive some Patriot-like missiles that are under development in Europe in coordination with Ukraine? Are they going to be able to make it through the winter until they can get all of these new missiles and new defense and offensive weapons deployed?
I would never bet against Ukraine. I mean, they have shown a resilience that is so much stronger than I think many people would have anticipated or believed. You understood that, but I think most people probably just like, man, it must be terrible. Of course, it's terrible. But it's interesting that while Ukraine targets logistics hubs and oil and gas infrastructure, Russia targets civilians, apartment buildings, civilian infrastructure, nonstop. And we know from the history of strategic bombing going back at least to the Second World War, that has never been decisive. And so I think the Russian approach is not going to be decisive. It's only going to kill a lot of innocent people. In the meanwhile, Ukraine is not sitting on their hands. I think that they're going to look for as many ways as possible to kill the archer. Knocking down the incoming missiles is important, but the most important thing is killing the people that are launching those ballistic missiles, destroying the sites, and even more important is to destroy the places where they are manufactured, whether it's Russian manufacture or if they are North Korean ballistic missiles that enter the battlefield. Those things are going to be targeted. So killing the archer is a much better approach than just focusing on intercepting all the arrows. Easier said than done, but whether Ukraine does this with their own long-range weapon systems or GUR or other special forces, however they do it, I would never bet against Ukraine. But of course, I think you and I both are extremely unhappy with the administration decision to not provide missile defense systems to Ukraine. Of course, to be fair, the previous administration also failed to do this in any decisive way. The Biden administration failed to even say that we wanted Ukraine to win this war. And so you ended up with these weak policies that we've talked about many times. The Trump administration, though, I mean, Vice President Vance even bragged about what an accomplishment it was to stop aid to Ukraine. So the part that's shameful is that Europe has not come up with its own system that would be effective. I mean, the technology of the Patriots entered the military when you and I were serving a very long time ago. Obviously, the sophistication of the interceptor, we're up to PAC-3 now. A version of the PAC-3 is beyond what entered service back in the 80s and 90s. But nonetheless, the technology is not something that European countries could not have matched somehow. So they're slow. I know there are efforts underway in different countries to develop things, but that's not going to be in place before this winter. So, long answer to your good question. I think it will be a very difficult winter, as they all are. But I think we can't forget that the pressure that Russia is under as well.
Well, that always, of course, leads to so many other questions, and I don't have time for them. But I'll just say this: that yes, as I mentioned briefly, Ukraine is coordinating with Europe to develop their own anti-ballistic missile system, which would be a much cheaper version of a Patriot-like defense system. But as you said, that's not going to be able to be deployed anywhere before at least the middle of next year. So it's not going to help anything this winter. And even Ukraine, with their new iterations of the Flamingo, it's not going to be available as a defensive weapon until, at the very least, late this year, but probably not until sometime next year. Let me ask you this, because you've spoken a lot about Crimea as being key to the defeating Russia, at least the beginning of the defeat of Russia. Where is that right now? Where is Ukraine's strategy in basically forcing Russia to vacate Crimea?
So I do believe that Crimea is the decisive terrain of this war, because once Russia has finally been either driven out or had to abandon its efforts in Crimea, that will be such a dramatic political change, or will lead to such a dramatic political change in Russia. I'm not saying that will topple Putin, but I mean, it's hard to imagine him remaining in power like everything's normal after Crimea is taken back by Ukraine. And then, frankly, there's the geographic impact of losing what Crimea offers, which is a platform for continued attacks on Odessa and other parts of southern Ukraine, the ability to disrupt Ukrainian shipping, Romanian oil exploration, etc. So there would be a real problem for the Russians once Ukraine has been able to retake it. Obviously, I've been too optimistic in the past on when and how that might happen, but what's happening now is the isolation of the Crimean Peninsula and the making of the peninsula untenable for Russian forces so that they cannot operate from there. Those are the two prerequisites before finally getting the Russians out of there.
I just want to throw in here, getting back to our last topic, because I know I'm going to get comments about this. I have been one of the harshest critics about the Biden administration and their failure to support Ukraine. And as you said, their failure even to articulate what the strategy is, whether we support a Ukrainian victory, a Russian defeat, or whatever. I was so tired of hearing for as long as it takes that I couldn't even listen to it anymore. So, no, you know how I feel about Trump, but I was equally as critical about the Biden administration and Ukraine. Let me ask you this then. The Kerch Bridge, with all of the successes that Ukraine has had in targeting Russian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, military facilities, driving the Russian Navy essentially out of the Black Sea for all intents and purposes. Why is that bridge still standing, in your opinion?
Of course, I don't know, but I can imagine that there is some value in leaving it open for Russians to leave. Even if, especially if the Russians are not using it as a principal main line of communications. If the bridge, and I think this was the case just several weeks ago, that the bridge was not able to support heavy convoys loaded with ammunition and fuel, for example, and the Russians didn't want to provide an opportunity for Ukraine to hit the bridge when there's ammunition trains or fuel trains crossing it, to increase the effect. So if the bridge is not essential for Russians supporting operations in Ukraine, then for now, I can see higher priorities. Now, to take out that bridge will require an enormous amount of explosive, a lot of things. And so I think the Ukrainians I'm sure, have thought through and have plans for how they're going to do it. And I think they'll do it when it's right for them. And I think we'll all be pleasantly surprised when it does happen.
And I'm not going to second guess the Ukrainian strategy. I mean, they know what they're doing. But boy, wouldn't it be a great symbolic blow to Putin to see that bridge go up?
I can't wait.
Flames. Yeah, I can't wait either. In the time we have remaining, because I know you've got to leave fairly soon. I have to ask you this, because this is another. I don't know how to explain it, so I'll just put up a story, I think, from the New York Times and get your opinion about this. Trump says the White House needs a military complex as courts block his ballroom. When Trump first unveiled his plans for the new East Wing addition, he said it was needed to host VIP guests. More recently, he's calling it a desperately needed national security structure. Is this a desperately needed national security structure, Ben?
Of course not. He's got the world's largest military complex just across the river. It's called the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And they've always had protected underground facilities there in the White House and over at the executive office building to do all these things they need to do. I mean, the president is not the guy on the map, moving the pieces around, controlling the war. This is, I think, what is the right word? Crass attempt to somehow get the money or justify the need so he can have his ballroom. And I think any serious people, cynical is the word. It's a cynical attempt to get the ballroom that he desperately wants to have. And so by justifying it as the roof is for drones and the underground is a bunker that's needed, no serious person believes that. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people in this administration and their supporters that will go along with it. And I think we also cannot dismiss the idea that after or during the elections here in November, and maybe elections 2 years after that, that the White House, that this administration would want a facility from which they could more closely control things, let's say. I don't know that, but it fits into that kind of a pattern. And I think, again, someday, somewhere, members of Congress are going to realize that after this administration is over, they're going to, in history, be remembered forever as having tolerated and enabled all of this. And they have to look their voters in the face here in November.
Well, as you said, this is nonsense. It's, of course, not necessary for national security. But as you also said correctly, I believe, there's literally tens of millions of Americans, MAGA and Trump supporters, who will believe this because they believe everything he says. And so this is now a very important talking point for them. And we do have the November elections coming up very, very soon. It's maybe not the most important point, but it is something that's going to be in the mix. And the fact that they're going to swallow it whole cloth just really bothers me a lot. But before I get into my last question for you, I just want to throw up this graphic, which is a quote from one of my favorite Americans, the founder, the father of our country, the first president of the United States in regard to the current president. And let me know what you think about that.
Well, the best news I heard the other day was that, experts have looked at Mount Rushmore and said there's no way you could add a fifth face. So that I don't think we have to worry about that.
Well, if you take a look at this, and I don't know if you can see it now with the, maybe you can. Trump is correctly envisioned as bald. Because, of course, that's what he probably is under his many, many wigs and orange fright clown wigs and all that stuff. In any event, let me get rid of this for right now. And I want to go, like I said, to my last topic. I'm going to circle back around to your stomping grounds, which is NATO. we'll close out on that. And my question is, as we all knew, the Russian provocations in Europe aren't going to stop. They've in fact increased. We can talk about the drone that was found at the Leipzig airport, the constant interference in the politics of of various NATO countries, the ships going through the English Channel, and just all kinds of different stuff going on. Do you think, and as recently as I think yesterday, with drones being shot down over Romania, before that Bulgaria, do you think that NATO, even today, after all the provocation and the things that Russia has been doing over the last for a long time, are they adequately responding to this, or are they still being very, very hesitant to the point of being dangerous in their response?
I don't think there's an adequate response in place by the alliance, but also by the nations. I mean, here in Germany, this Leipzig thing was quite a topic. But of course, it happened during the summer holidays, so not so many people are around, and it's just, but it still is in the news. And you still have too many people that are treating these types of activities as individual law enforcement events, where you have to have perfect evidence. You can't say it was Russia. And the Russians know that, of course. And that's the whole point of gray zone operations and hybrid tactics, is the lack of obvious, or the difficulty of obvious attribution. And I think this is where the leadership of each of the nations has got to say, okay, who are we kidding? Of course, this is Russia that's behind it, even if there's not a Russian soldier waving a Russian flag like they did from the top of the Reichstag in 1945. This is clearly at the behest of Russian authorities. And so we have to figure out, how do you impose consequences on Russia, diplomatic, economic, even military, so that they feel some pain. Otherwise, they will never, ever change their behavior. And Lavrov just the other day was quoted. I mean, he said he came as close as you could possibly get to an actual confession that it was them. He said, we're going to destroy all the different efforts that are out there trying to help Ukraine in this war against us. So I think you can kind of feel that more and more people are getting frustrated with this, recognize it's Russia, but they're not sure where to act. And this is where it would be really good if the United States was to say, in its traditional role as a leader within the alliance, would call out Russia and would put pressure on them, and then nations would feel more confident, and the alliance could do certain things. But right now, there's still debates in the different countries about, who has jurisdiction. Is it the police? Is it a interior ministry? Is this defense? What do we do? This indecisiveness plays right into the hands of the Russians.
And of course, this has to do with with America abrogating its responsibilities and basically declaring a vacuum. If America was America for the last 80 years in terms of their relations with NATO, this wouldn't happen, because they would do exactly what you said. They'd put pressure on Russia to just say, cool it, stop. And They would, because, we weren't the paper tiger then. Let me ask you this, and this is the last question. If you had the authority to do something, to respond adequately in the way that you believe it should be responded to, what would you have either NATO collectively or individual nations do to respond to these Russian incursions?
Well, first of all, I'd stop calling it hybrid warfare. It's
warfare.
We tell our populations that the Russians are at war with us, even if they're not launching missiles directly at Bremerhaven or Antwerp or Gdansk or wherever. The Russians are at war with us, and they're using different tools on different scales, but the fact is they're at war. And so we have to take appropriate steps to prepare ourselves and to deter or defeat those efforts. That doesn't mean that we resort to conventional warfare against Russia. Nobody's interested in that. but Russia needs to suffer some consequences. Right now, they're not. There's a huge debate about whether or not to close down Russia House in Berlin. Well, if we close that down, the Russians will retaliate by closing down the Goethe Institute in Russia. Who cares? I mean, that does not matter in the great scheme of things. We can restart that after this is all over. So that's where the debate is. And so if I was the president or the Bundeskanzler or the prime minister, I'd start by being honest with my own population, say, look, here's what's going on. And then I would explain, by the way, every time Berlin airport or Copenhagen airport is shut down, it costs us X millions of euro in lost economic trade.
Revenue. Yeah.
Right, revenues. Thank you. That's what happens every time you shut down the airport. How many millions of euro are lost because planes are not flying? There's nothing coming and going. Or when a train is stopped because sabotage on the track. There's a real impact, and people don't feel it, or they still are scared. Oh, we don't want to provoke the Russians. And I think this is time for some serious leadership. Talk to us as if we are adults.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Ben Hodges, former U.S. Army commander in Europe, and what I consider a friend. Thank you very much for your opinions and your insight. As always, you take care, and we will hopefully be seeing you again soon.
I'll see you next month. Thanks a lot, Dave.
You bet. Take care.